that she's recording. All right.
I like her. I like having more friends on the meeting. What's one more?
Amazing. All right. So end of week one, and y'all crushed it. What?
Wow.
And Stacy, even though they finished 3 issues in 1 week, everyone reported spending around 4 to 5 hours on
Yes.
Collab, right?
That is amazing.
I know.
Oh my God. Yes. Yes. A+ team. A+.
I know, right? Isn't that great? So, so success. Well done. So today we are going to do demos, but demos are going to work a little bit differently for this project. There's a little added element that I'll tell you about in a second. Lauren's going to do learning module on story splitting, which will be related to that little thing that I'm going to add to the demos. And then we will do kind of a refinement, looking ahead thing at the next epic, the next few stories to make sure we have work for the coming week. So, so before you all demo what you worked on this week, we're going to do something that Stacy's very familiar with because we do this on our team at Collab, wherever I work during the day, during the week. What's that place called? Zapier. That's right.
That's the one. You got it.
And it's called a control chart. So those are words, right?
Oh.
A control chart. So what we're doing here, we talked last week about the difference between Scrum and Kanban, right? And in Scrum, what teams typically do is they assign story points to the stories. And at the end of a sprint, you add up the number of story points, and that's your velocity. So those are the terms that are used for all those things. In Kanban, there are no sprints. So there's not sort of set times when we can look at what our velocity is, although we can kind of fake it if we want to. But the thing that's important in Kanban is that we try to right size, kind of just reminding you of things that we talked about last week, right size all the issues. So if the issues are all roughly the same size, we get into a predictable cadence. We can say, oh, if we're supposed to ship this thing 10 days from now, that means we can finish, whatever, 8 issues. But there are 10 issues on the board, which 2 can we cut? You can have those kind of productive conversations about scope or timing or whatever. So most Kanban teams, a lot of Kanban teams, they shoot for 3 days as being the time between when an issue goes into in progress and when it's actually sort of shipped to users. So that's what we shoot for on our Stacy and my team at Zapier. It's the weekend, I forget where I work. So we're gonna, this chart is gonna get more interesting over time. We only have 3 issues on the chart. So if you know anything about statistics, it's not very statistically valid yet. Towards the end of the project, we'll actually be able to maybe see some trends and a little more standard deviation and things. But this chart, it's actually so tight that we don't have the standard deviation thing really showing up, but I'll explain what these things mean. So each of the little dots, it represents an issue, or like in this case, a cluster of issues. So these are 2 issues that finished at on the same day, I think. There is both a sort of rolling average over the time period, and then, or like an average for the whole time period, and then sort of the rolling average, which is, just the number of days and hours that it took to get through those states. So right now, like I said, not a lot of data, so it's not very interesting. The average was almost 5 days, which I would attribute more to, because you all had some of these things done pretty early. I would attribute that maybe more to maybe we didn't keep the board up to date all week, or maybe like kind of at the last minute sort of put things into done or something. So if we want this to be really accurate as we go, make sure we're keeping those states of the tickets reflecting reality. So yeah, so that's I guess that's all. And feel free to ask questions. But that's probably all I'll say about control charts this time. As we have more data, you'll start to see, jaggy lines and stuff. Any questions about that? No? Yeah.
There was one thing that when I tried to move a job into the ready for review, it could only take 2. So I moved it
Oh, and we
back.
had 3. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, it's not such a big deal, but it maybe could
Mhm.
affect that too.
Yeah, for sure. So would it not let you do that, or would it kind of sound alarms if you did that?
It gave me a warning and it
Mhm.
put everything in red. And then
Uh-huh.
I was like, well, I don't want to like accidentally like run up some charges. So I moved it back.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
That is
it won't.
okay.
Yeah, it is okay. We commonly exceed our limits on my and Stacy's team. So yeah, it's actually, but that's a good call out, and we could adjust the limit. So this is actually why the limits are helpful. So if the other solution would be for, I think, us mentors to like get these things reviewed faster so we can move them through that stage. So the limits on each column are really meant to surface issues and efficiency, right? So if we have way too many things in review, it does mean that, like, oh, come on, people, we need to be reviewing here. So we're gonna do a retro next time. This week, maybe we'll just, we'll keep an eye on it, but also tag us in, right away if you need reviews and stuff. We'll try to jump on them. At least I will. Can't speak for Lauren.
I have a
assume she would too.
question on behalf of Collabbies.
Yeah.
Let's pretend I'm one of you right now. What is our interaction with this? What do I need to do with this?
Oh, you don't need to do anything with this. We'll just review this each week to see how we're trending. It's really just a tool for surfacing different types of issues that might come up. Like, are we keeping the board up to date? Are we, do we have too many things in progress at once and that's slowing us down? Like, those kinds of things will be surfaced through the control chart.
Cool.
Good question, Stacy the Collabby. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing and I'm gonna turn it over to y'all to show us your work.
I'm so excited.
And remember, with the demos, I mean, you know how to do a demo, but in this case, on this project, we want to always be demoing in device mode, because this is really a phone-centric app. So
Ooh.
yeah.
Oh, I wonder if we should get like a subscription to, what's that tool that we use at Zapier? With all
Sizzy?
Sizzy.
Sizzy. Oh, that would be so good.
They have nonprofit discounts or something. Yeah.
I will go look right now.
All right, thank you.
That was.
I'll
Did-
just have the demos.
didn't- Did we talk about that yesterday during our meeting, or was that in our? Yeah.
Yeah,
we
I
talked
mentioned we talked
Sizzy
about
briefly.
that.
Oh, nice.
So cool. Yeah.
There's also browser stack where you could, if you don't have an Android device or something like that, you could test on Android. So
I have to tell you all, like, real life experience, how often you build something and you're like, it's beautiful, double chef's kiss, amazing, I'm amazing. And then you go to test it in Safari and you're like, I'm the worst in the world, this is terrible. So testing on multiple browsers is very important, turns out.
we had a little situation like that this week, right? With the map overlapping the nav, yeah.
Oh, I love it. Those kind of struggles are like the best. Like, now you learn, now you know.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's see it.
Yeah, which team wants to go first?
I mean, I have everything up already, so I can show,
Cool.
since ours does a little less, so then we can have the major ta-da come afterwards, maybe.
Okay, perfect.
So let me make sure. I haven't had to share screen for so long. This is so exciting.
It's the hardest
That little
part
green
of
button
working
down the bottom
remotely.
middle. Yeah, yeah, right.
I'm just like, what's on my screen? All right, here we go.
Uh-huh.
Oh, look at that. It's so pretty. Okay, so yeah, Megan and I, we just needed to we found a logo. We left it spinning just because we thought it was fun. So we kept it spinning, so you can tell we're on localhost 3000. Got the little icon hanging out up there. If we look at it in device mode like we're supposed to, it still does the same pretty thing. And then we were supposed to make it so that it works on actual phone as well. So can you see, I got the little icon
Yep, icon
on the
on brown
phone.
screen.
You push it and it's on my phone.
Awesome.
Yippee! So yeah, so we got that little part going with the PWA. I already
Mhm.
forgot what PWA stands for.
Progressive
did.
web
Progressive
app.
web.
Yeah.
Or we did parts, or we did many steps to make it into a progressive web app. So
Yeah,
That's
I'd love to
what we got.
hear if there was anything, or I don't know if you want to show some code, but or if there's anything you kind of learned through the process of doing that.
I think it was pretty interesting to one, be in the year 2021 and find out that Apple doesn't support SVGs for its touch icons. That's a contention on the web, it seems, so that's
Mhm.
interesting. And lots of work into that. Like, granted, the process was fairly simple with editing the metadata that was already there. I'll share my screen, at least with the Create React app. There was kind of a template to start with already.
Mhm.
But so you can see the favicon. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. I've always just said it that way. I've never heard anyone say it. And the different logo sizes. Katya brought up a really interesting point about how many we should support. We kind of went with what the template had here for now, but maybe that's something we'd look in the future. And then I'm really interested in the service worker actions, whether we get to those or not. I've been sort of following a little bit along with like the idea of the next billion users, how most people, not having access to high-speed internet, these progressive web apps and service workers can help them utilize things on their phones without having connections, so that things are a lot more accessible and people can do more stuff. And so I remember hearing a talk about that, but I didn't quite put two and two together until we started doing this.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. And if we towards the end of the project, there's probably going to be space for us to choose our own adventure a little bit. So the last time we did this, they decided they wanted to implement search. So you could search for a place name or an address or something and have the map kind of shift to there and show pins. And that was cool. It was a lot more scope than they expected, but it was cool. But if we wanted to go down the route of trying to make this a true PWA, I can already think of like one of the problems that would one of the things that would make it hard to do that for this app would be that those locations are like the precision of the locations would mean that you're almost never making the same API call twice, right? But you could maybe take those numbers, say like, I don't know what we're at Portland, we're like, 45.1923 latitude or whatever, right? You could take those and like round it or something and always round it to the same precision. And maybe you would be able to use the same API calls over and over again and it would be good enough, if you know what I mean? And then you could start caching those API calls. Although I don't know if the Google Maps side would work offline, but
I've realized like I use that recently because we have been going on a couple of hikes and some of the hikes have been kind of weird. And so of course you never have service when you're out there, at least I don't. But there are newer people that you could pay for a subscription to their service. And basically that, I assume that's what you're getting, is that you can view the map without having service and see where you're at and make sure you're still on the right trail.
And sometimes your phone will still do GPS without having any kind of connection too. There's literal GPS receivers in your phones. So your phone will know its location, but it won't be able to make API calls, right? So you'd have to still have those cached somewhere.
Can I just say about this whole conversation that's happening is this is interview gold. Like, here was our problem we were solving. We wanted to use PWAs because X, Y, Z, but these were the trade-offs that we came across, and this is what we decided to do. So bookmark this in your journal somewhere. It's good stuff.
For sure. And it was really interesting, Katya, bringing up all the different icon sizes. Because if you want to go all the way with it, it is really complicated. And I think, by where we landed, I think is the right step for now, like this point in the project, where let's just go with these two. It's probably good enough. If we get to the end of the project and we find out that on a particular device, it's fuzzy or something, we can add more sizes to make sure that it's sort of polished at the end. But
by the way,
yeah.
I still didn't understand the discrepancy, the difference in rendering behavior. My native app on iPhone renders the app perfectly fine, while if the same app accessed on the same phone but launched in Safari, it has problems. It renders differently. I didn't understand.
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly. I mean, it could have to like do with text zoom sizes or some kind of settings or something, but because there were, like in that little video that I recorded, at certain sizes the nav would overlap the map, right? But yeah, I'm not sure what exactly was happening in the case that you showed. So what we'll do is just try to make it like maybe restructure the kind of bones of the app to make it more resilient to all that. All right, y'all, Katya and Alejandro, you want to show your work?
Okay, I'll go first. Okay. So the first task for us was to create 4 views, each rendering its name and include a navigation between those views. To make our app have 4 routes, first we needed to install and add React Router DOM to our app. Then we needed to wrap our app into a router. And for each of our views, we needed to create a route. We also needed to give a path, each route a path parameter, so that, for example, whenever we navigated to a / path, we could see a map component. Whenever we navigated to a / list path, we could see a list component rendered, etc., etc. We also needed to make sure that our app accommodates a navbar present at the bottom of the app. The CSS adjustment preventing the map overflowing the nav area is going to be added by me later this evening. So our navbar consists of navlink components, and the main difference is so it's an extended version of the link component from React Router, and the main difference is that navlink allows us to identify our current route by applying an active state to it. So we are setting that to active, which we pull in from our app CSS. And you can see over here in the browser that the home link, the map link, is in fact underlined. And if I go to list, you will see that it also received that class of active. And if we take a look at that in the element panel, we can also see it has been given an active class. And the rest will be explained by Alejandro.
Okay. Nice.
Okay, let me share the screen, please. Okay, we work with the map component. We add the Google Map React Map at the map view and add the component in the return for the component, and we passed some props like the key. It's an IP key for the Google Maps and the default center point of the map, and we choose the Paris as a location, and we pass the latitude and longitude, and finally we pass the level zoom for the map. And Katia, we work with the map area, the CSS for the component. We put the properties, the weight and the height, and the map area for the component, we put the height, and the result is this, and it's the map on the component, and that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, nice. I love it. Google Maps is one of my favorite things to work with because you just feel like a magician or something. You know, like you put a map on the page. Now you like drag it around and zoom in and out, all this kind of stuff. You didn't have to do very much, but yeah, that looks great. Any questions? Did it? How did the pairing go this week for y'all?
Time zone wise, you mean?
Oh well, yeah. There's that. Yeah, for sure.
It actually went pretty well, and I think the best thing was that we had Sunday ahead of us, so we could pick any time during the day that would suit any of us. So yeah, that was the best thing.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah.
Did you have any issues? Like, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying it went super well. It's like it's nice to get to know people at first and then start digging in.
I love what you say. Can I just say too, I'm super impressed that this is week 1 and this looks like an app. Like, what? This is amazing. Really great. I'm so impressed.
Yep.
Super
I couldn't
polished.
do that. So
to me, the most challenging bit was actually working on CSS and creating a layout accommodating the map and footer and making the navbar gravitating towards the bottom. And then there was another CSS bug. There was a jump of content whenever you would switch from one to another using the navigation so that it doesn't jump. Yeah, that was challenging.
Yeah, did you add like all of the root stuff too already? It looks like you did a lot of work setting up a baseline.
It was a part of that ticket. We did it together with Alejandro.
I love it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the amount of the amount of CSS that was used and just like really polishing it up, because I was expecting new times Roman and all of that and just kind of all like smushed. So thank you for that extra effort with that, because I think it really set the bar like even that much higher, and it just feels that much better at the end of week 1. So
yeah, it just looks really polished already for sure.
Is this like the other projects where there's like time for styling later, or is the styling really integrated?
Yeah, this is actually the project that initiated that design ticket.
Oh, nice.
So it came from the last time we did this. Yeah. So yeah, there is time at the end. Sorry.
I said, can y'all tell I know nothing about this project? I'm very excited. This is like, I'm seeing brand new stuff here and I love it.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, so we will spend on time on that, but I do agree, like to make it just feel like a mobile app, like it's good to have a little bit of just kind of the basic styling in there for sure.
Make you not resent it in the meantime. It's very important. I promise. So great job.
Yeah. All right. Good job, everybody.
Yes.
Super nice.
Yep. Lauren, I will turn it over to you.
Cool. All right, let me make sure, share my screen. Hardest part of working remotely.
Yeah.
And let me organize my windows a little bit. Maybe.
Stacy's familiar with this presentation too. From Zach.
Good one. It's a real good one. You're gonna love it. Especially
okay.
She's amazing.
Yay. So I am super excited that I get to talk about story splitting today, because it's something, and I was excited to prepare and learn more specifically about story splitting, because it's something that I've understood kind of intuitively for a long time, but I didn't really know the more agile origins of it. So I love processes and learning about processes. So I'm really excited to talk about story splitting. What, why, and how. So when we talk about story splitting, we already know what the concept of a story is. We have epics, in our project, and they're broken down into stories. So a story, when we're talking about it, is a description of some improvement to your product, and it's usually written from the perspective of a user, right? So as a user, I want to pan around my map and see pins marking places of interest. We describe that story in the perspective of the user. They're units of work, and it's a term that we use both in Scrum and Kanban, like we learned about last week. In Scrum, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the meeting, that teams will assign story points to estimate maybe how big this particular story, how complex it is. We're working in a more Kanban style, so we're trying to have our stories be right-sized. Andrew talks about on his and Stacy's team that they try to have their stories be about 3 days worth of work, right, from start to finish. So I don't know if we've talked about that for what we want that to be for this team.
I don't think we have.
So that's something we might want to consider, like when we're looking at our stories and maybe splitting our stories, breaking them down into smaller size stories. What's the right size for our team? So we want to come up with some kind of right size to our stories. So it's like an agreed upon range. And it's, again, it kind of makes sense, but it's the act of breaking down a big story into multiple smaller stories that will achieve the same end result as the original user story. You can even think of an epic. An epic is a story in and of itself. We describe that as a story from the perspective of the user, but then we can break that epic down into smaller stories that all roll up into that epic to complete that epic. So an example of a story, so this is a huge story. As a user, I want to be able to manage my account on xyz.com. I mean, there's a lot involved in there, and I can't imagine completing that work in 3 days of time. So, and as a developer, if I get that story, I'd be like, whoa, I don't even know where to start, right? It's a lot to think about. So story splitting helps us to break that down into smaller, more manageable chunks, just from the developer perspective. So we can split that down into, as a user, I want to be able to log into xyz.com. As a user, I want to be able to reset my password, right? That's another part of managing my account. So all of these smaller stories roll up into that really big story to complete that work. Another example that is really familiar to us is the shopping list that everyone's worked on. So really, we can think of the smart shopping list as one gigantic story. As a user, I want a shopping list that learns my habits so that I can shop more efficiently, right? But that, like, if we would get that story at the beginning of a project, be like, okay, where do I even start with that? That is a huge, huge project, and I'm not really sure where to begin. So we split that down, we break that down into smaller stories. As a user, I want to be able to create a new list. As a user, I want to be able to add an item to my list. These are smaller, more manageable chunks of work that all roll up into that big story of the shopping list. And we can even think of, like, some of these stories, some of these smaller ideas could maybe even be split down or broken down into even smaller stories, right? Depending on what we decide is like the right sized amount that makes us feel productive, and then makes that cadence feel really predictable for that product team. So again, we've talked about this. Our project is organized into epics. An epic is really a story that's broken down into smaller stories. There's even, you can even have like a saga, right? Which is even bigger than an epic, and a saga can be broken down into more epics. It's sort of like, I like to think about it as the Fellowship of the Ring trilogy, if anyone has read those, right? Like, that's a saga, and then it has 3 different books in it that are epics. And even inside of those stories, there are many more stories inside of those. So saga, huge, like tons of work, epic, kind of a lot of work. Then we break that down into smaller stories so that we can, so that we can predict how long a particular chunk of work will take. We can establish a cadence for our team. And then I kind of hinted to this, but as a developer, having my work really right-sized helps me feel more confident in the work that I'm doing. It helps me know exactly, like, this is the end goal of this particular story. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I know about how long it's going to take. So I have that in my mind as my destination. And it helps me to be able to move a little bit faster. If stories are a little too large, it makes things feel a little bit nebulous and uncertain. So having stories right size really helps you as a developer just be a little more productive. Okay, so I've referred to this already. Why do we split stories? So a story should have the following characteristics. So stories that are too big usually don't, or a story that's right size, let's put it this way. A story that's the right size will be independent. So in general, it's not going to be dependent on other stories, although there's some caveats to that, right? That sometimes a story is, you need to wait to do this story until this other one is done, right? They're not always independent. Stories are negotiable all of the time. Like on teams, we talk about splitting off stories. Like maybe we didn't right size a story to begin with, and the developers who are working on a particular story are like, you know what, this is not the right size. There's more work to this than we thought. Let's see if we can split this story, right? Stories are going to be negotiable. They're valuable. We talk about them in terms of what kind of value they provide to the user or to the stakeholder. They're estimatable. They're unambiguous enough. I mean, there's a little ambiguity all of the time, but they're unambiguous enough to estimate about how long something will take. Again, right, in Scrum, we talk about story points, how large something is. And in Kanban, we try to right size it to that, let's say, 3-day time period. They're small. I kind of alluded to this. They're small enough that you can visualize the whole solution. And it's testable. So we have these acceptance criteria. We know that at the end of the story, this can all be tested, and that particular story is done. Any questions so far?
I might just add from your point from the last slide about that it's like the or the last slide, I don't know, just the right sizing thing. Like it's a really valuable tool for just having the right conversations with your manager, with the product manager around, you know, like if you're into the story, you're like, you discover a bunch of scope, and you're like, this is going to take more than 3 days, you know, then you surface that to your manager. You like let them know right away that like, hey, you know what, I found out that in order to get this thing done, I'm gonna have to go into this other part of the system and do this other work. And then that's a point where you're like, okay, let's actually split this story into 2 things, like this one where you have to go and do this other work, and the thing that we originally thought you could do without that, right? So it's like it's, you know, it's sort of like the work in progress limits. Like it's a tool for you to have some of the right conversations and just keep visibility to what you're doing.
Cool. Yeah, and then just to piggyback on that, and it's a way for teams to have like this predictable cadence of like, okay, our team is this many developers. We have these stories that take 3 days to complete. So we know approximately if a sprint is 1 week or 2 weeks, we know approximately how many stories we can get done in a week. And then we can go look at that control chart and say, hey, how are we doing? Like, was there something that got in our way? And then when we have our retrospective, we could say, oh, what happened? And then again, as a developer, it really helps you just feel more in control rather than having this huge chunk of work that you have to break down in your mind, right? This work is broken down for you. So why? Agile is designed to allow teams to deliver as much value as possible by focusing on the highest priority work. If we have this big project like the shopping list, we have to do some things in order, right? But we split this work down into stories so that we do the highest priority items first. Like, let's deliver the features that are going to be the best for users, and like the product owner is really going to decide at the end of the day what those features are. In software, this is super true. Like, in software, the last 20% of the work often takes 80% of the time. You know, you have this project that's supposed to take about this long, and you get 80, like you move through 80% of the work and you're like, yeah, we're moving so fast. And then this last 20% of the work is like, oh my gosh, are we ever gonna, it's like, it gets exponentially, it feels like exponentially more work the closer you get to the finish line. So as we go through these sprints, as we go through these iterations, we can decide, hey, you know, maybe this is good for an MVP. We've delivered all of these really high priority features. The product owner can decide, do we really need these last two features, or can we release this product now, get some feedback from our users, and maybe we'll discover that those features that we had in mind at the beginning weren't really that necessary or weren't that important to users. So this is a way to have a more predictable cadence, and then we can decide, like, when we're 80% done, how are we doing? Is this product ready to be shown to users? Yeah, so small stories, again, give the team more flexibility in deciding when that product is done. So how do we do it? This is a really cool way to think about it that I hadn't done before. I had written stories more in the idea of it being very task oriented as opposed to very user focused. So this is a really cool way to think about it. So if we want to break down a story, let's say we have this story that's registration. As an owner of unwanted stuff, I want to be able to register for the online auction website so that I can sell my unwanted stuff. So maybe this isn't right size. It feels pretty big. There are probably lots of chunks of registering for a website that will roll up into this story. So we take this I want statement, or I can statement, I can register for the online auction website, and we make that the end goal of the new stories. So for example, as an owner of unwanted stuff, right, that's the same. I can enter my registration details. So I can just put in my name, email address, and password, etc. And then the end goal is so that I can register for the online auction website. Again, that's the middle part of the big story. Next story, as an owner of unwanted stuff, this is another part. I can submit my registration details so that I can register for the online website. As an owner of unwanted stuff, I want to make sure that my information is validated and everything is secure so that I can register for the online auction website. There might be multiple stories inside of this big story. So this is a good process to think about as we move through our stories, like week to week. Can this be broken down into smaller stories that might feel more manageable and help us move a little bit faster? So this is talking about what are some natural breaking points or fault lines. Where do we want to split stories off? What's a good process for thinking about where we can break off those stories? So functional versus non-functional requirements. Let's say, again, we're doing this website registration. We build the website registration, but then we want to make it faster, right? So that could be a natural breaking point. We have one part where we just get the work done. We have a second piece that makes it faster to bring more value to those users. We're already kind of doing this naturally. So UI channel or different devices, we're really focusing on the mobile experience for stuff. But if we wanted, we could have some other stories that maybe address desktop view. That would be a way to kind of break off stories. First, we're going to focus on the mobile view, and then we're going to add website view, but maybe that's a lower priority. Different user types. So we could have, let's say a website has an admin kind of role, right? That person has a lot more permissions than the regular user of this website. So an admin might have a particular flow for registering, and a user might have a separate kind of flow for registering for the website, for example. Oh, this one I didn't quite understand, Andrew. Goal level summary goals versus user goals.
Yeah, it's been a while since I read the articles behind this, but I mean, the user goals, those are, the things that the user wants to do. I think the summary goals, that refers to sort of like, I want a shopping list kind of thing, like the bigger things. Mm-hmm. Whereas the user goals are like, I want to be able to add an item. I want to be able to, mark it as purchased. I think I'd have to go back and read the article, actually. That one, okay, a little fuzzy to me too.
It's a little fuzzy. This is a good one. So the user flow, I do this a lot in my own work. So maybe I'll build what's called the happy path, or the path where nothing breaks. So the happy path, user flow, and then maybe a separate story that addresses edge cases or error states. Like when I'm registering, the user can enter their information, hit submit, and everything works great. What happens if they enter an invalid username, or what happens if they forget to enter their email or something, a required field, right? We can add that kind of form validation as a separate user story, happy path versus edge or error cases. Level of polish, this is a really good one. So if you think about, in this case, for example, adding a date field to a form, you can have a date field that this will bring value to the user, that they're just able to type in a date, and that's the end of the story. But maybe we want to make it a little fancier. So a story further down the line that's maybe a lower priority, but a nice to have, would be adding a shiny date picker that looks really cool and is of course very accessible, which is hard with date pickers. Steps or skeletons. So for example, make a view appear, add settings to the view, or I like to think of like fleshing out the main part of what this thing needs to look like, and then adding more features to it as you move along, right? The highest priority fields are added to a form first of all, and then we add some, we flesh it out later. Oh, Andrew said summary level user goals are collections of related user goals. For example, manage widgets breaks down into create a widget, view a widget, edit a widget, delete a widget. So exactly what he had said before, like a bigger goal, create a shopping list. Very good, very good. And then more focused stories that roll up to that larger story. So that's kind of how far is too far? This is a good one. Oh, sorry. So as a developer, I want to type the letter C so I can start the process of assigning a variable. Is taking it too far, right? I think as a developer personally, like these are the stories that we want to create sometimes. Like I want to get this part of this story done, and then I want to get this part of this story done. They end up being more task oriented. So we actually can create subtasks that roll up to stories. So if you think about when I'm planning out my work, for example, if I'm working on a story, I'll make a checklist before I get started. That like, I need to get this thing done. I need to get this thing done. Oh, I need to look and see how to do this other thing, right? Those aren't stories. Those are really just, those are tasks. Those are things I as a developer need to get done, but they're not delivering value to the user. It's not user focused. It's like personally focused in my work, right? So when the story is so small, it doesn't provide any actual user-facing benefit. Like that's probably too small, and then it needs to be a subtask. And we can create those too. Those are perfectly valid chunks of work, but we don't call it a story. So we've typically given this talk a little bit later in the project. So we're giving this story splitting talk right now so that as we're moving through the project in these more maybe bigger stories that could be broken down, right? You can have this top of mind, and we can have this top of mind when we are planning our work at the end of this meeting. Like, hey, can this be broken down? Can this be split off into smaller stories? And then just to, I'm trying to think, oh, which of the fault lines apply to our project, do you think? That's actually a pretty good question. We've kind of already talked about, like, we're really focused on the UI channel, we're focused on the mobile view, not as much on the desktop view, but that might be something to consider.
Maybe flip back to that slide so you can see the options again.
Here we go.
There we go.
So feature versus performance, I think that's actually something that we've kind of talked about already, right? Like, okay, we've got the Navbar at the bottom, and we've got the nav, but we've run into some, like, maybe it doesn't always look super perfect, right? I guess that's feature versus performance. Like it meets the requirements, it meets the AC, but maybe we can improve it, make it better.
It's kind of UI channel too, because it works fine on a phone.
Yeah.
It's just on desktop browser, and we can deprioritize fixing the desktop browser. That's a choice we can make.
Yep.
I think we're about to get into some user flow stuff, like happy path versus edge cases. There's a story, I don't know if it's this week or next week, that talks about, like, you know, if the API returns no results for the location, like we need to handle that gracefully somehow, right? Like it's, you know, if the center is in the middle of the ocean, like there's nothing, Wikipedia has nothing to show us, right? So when I first built this app for myself, I was getting all kinds of errors, and I didn't realize this, because Wikipedia is not returning anything. So I hadn't thought about that or tested it. So that's maybe something we could look at. Level of polish, we're making a choice right now to not focus too much on the look and feel. Like we have a good level of polish that'll probably take us through towards the end of the project, where we can make it look nicer. What else? Anything else?
Guess we don't really have different, we don't have admins versus users. We could add internationalization. I don't know if that's something, like, but that would almost be, that would be a huge story to add to this project. And
yeah, that'd be big. There are two user types though. So we are going to get to a point where we ask for people's location, and people can decline, right? So we're going to have people that give us their location and people that don't. So those are two different user types, and we can decide how we prioritize one over the other.
Two different experiences. Yeah.
I guess there's steps or skeletons too, because you could have information of how to access things. Like I know on the demo app, there's the how to add the app to your phone and how to navigate.
Yeah, we've already done that, right? We have like a blank help screen, blank setting screen. So those are skeletons that we're planning to fill in later. So yeah, good call. Great job, Lauren. I'm really impressed.
Thanks. I love this stuff. I loved learning. I loved going through this presentation and learning about it, to be honest, like to tie some actual knowledge to what I felt in my heart as a developer.
Mhm.
That's exactly right. That's the beauty of it. Because I feel like there are many people who kind of think in this way already, like it feels like a natural thing to do. But learning the words that go along with it just helps you articulate your thoughts better. So if you are doing this kind of thing and your product manager, your engineering manager is like, what is happening? You're like, let me explain it to you. Look at the slide deck. Let's get started. So I love it. This is so good. Good job, Lauren.
Yep. All right. So the next thing we were going to do is to look ahead at the next epic. Pull up the chat so I don't miss anything. I love the Lord of the Rings reference too. I never thought about it that way, but it's totally true. All right, so this epic is done. Good job, team. Selected for development. Skip ahead, that one's done. The next one has to do with, I can open this in its own window so it's see it a little better. So this next epic is all about reading from the Near Me API, so we can display places on the map and in the table view or list view. So there, it's I'm now remembering a little detail from this. So there are these 4 stories in the epic. So rendering pins from the nearby API. So pins, I should actually just change this on the map so it's a little more clear. Pins kind of implies that it's a map, but just want to be clear about it. So render pins on the map from the nearby API. So as a user, I want to see places with Wikipedia entries on a map so that, you know, you might learn something. Anyway, so the assumptions are that we're going to access Wikipedia's nearby API via a proxy endpoint to get around CORS restrictions. Next time we do a learning module, we're going to talk about CORS. If you haven't encountered it before, it's a security mechanism in browsers. We have this proxy endpoint that we use that it's actually, this links to an example of that in action. So passing in, you know, 45 as the lat and -123.456 as the longitude gives you a set of pins. And so I chose those numbers on purpose to show that you could both use an integer or you could use a signed float. Those are both valid inputs to this API call. Does that make sense? That's a lot of words. Not 100% sure everybody understands, but they're all good with that. So then you get back this JSON blob that has information in it about places. So we'll be accessing that API or using that endpoint, and this is the work. Anyway, we'll talk about that next one. I won't go into it. So you can actually see the code for the proxy as well. So that's in this gist. So you can, you know, if you're curious, you can kind of look and see how that works, and then when we do that learning module, we'll explain what all these different things mean. So for the purposes of the story, we'll use latitude and longitude, use the latitude and longitude used to render the default map. So you've already set a center. Paris is a very good choice. Lots of Wikipedia entries in Paris. So that'll make for an interesting map. So use that same center to do the initial fetching, and then we'll build in more interactivity later. But so this really is sort of the crux of the app's functionality. So it's kind of what makes it interesting. I see people kind of squinting, so I'll bump this up a little bit. So this is related to, what is this story?
I think that's a list view.
Oh, right. Okay, that's right. So yeah, these 2 stories are very similar in that they'll both make the same API call, and they're just rendering it to 2 different places. So to different formats. So we kind of ran into a thing last time where it's like you we can't really have both of those in progress at the same time, or we could, but we're going to end up with two implementations of how to call the API. So it might make sense to do this and the list view sequentially, have one, or it's an opportunity to maybe story split. Maybe there's a separate story, which is to just make the API call. And then there are two smaller stories, which are render to the map and render to the list. So that might be an opportunity to story split if the team wants to go that direction. Otherwise, there's kind of a dependency between the two stories. Anybody have any opinions about that? I mean, you're just seeing this for the first time, so.
I didn't understand the results should be rendered in a table or in a list, because I know that table is very difficult to work with, especially accessibility wise, because I built a table in one of my projects and I know that it's hard.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny because the table was actually a suggestion from another mentor who was like, maps are just not very accessible. So let's have a table that shows the same information, because that'll be more accessible for it compared to a map. I mean, it still has its own accessibility issues. It could be a list too. It could be simpler than a table, but this is sort of, you could think of it as a table of data, which is what tables were originally intended for. So, but yeah, for this particular story is about rendering it on the map. So there's a separate story, this 12, that is about rendering to a list or a table. But I think I may have even intended to split these out after the last project. That was feedback that they gave. It's like, let's just take care of the API calls, and then let's have two stories that are about the rendering. So we could do that splitting.
And I have a question. So the proxy endpoint is necessary to avoid running into a coarse error, because yeah, it is correct.
Yes, that's right. So their API was really intended only to be called from like Wikipedia properties, right? And so if we try to call it directly from our app, it's going to reject. It's going to give us a 403 response. So forbidden error. So this proxy endpoint, because that runs on a server, there aren't the same CORS restrictions, right? So CORS is really something that's built into web browsers. It's not like their server isn't the problem. It's the web browser itself is negotiating with the server. That makes sense. So by having a proxy endpoint that allows our app through, that server can then talk to their server and get the information and pass it through back to our app. All right, see you, Stacy. Thanks for coming. All right, so I guess what I had originally, when I first wrote these stories, what I kind of intended was you might set two PRs for this one story. One where you get the API access working, and a second one where you do the rendering. That would be another way to approach it is, one team gets the PR merged for the API, and then each team could take one of the rendering channels. That would be a way to kind of parallelize the work a little bit. Let me stew on that for a second. So the acceptance criteria here. So when the app starts, so when we first kind of hit the icon on our home screen, an API call should be made to the proxy endpoint using the latitude and longitude at the center of the map. That data should be used to render pins on the map, which should be 24 by 24 pixels in size. So that's sort of the minimum kind of accessible, usable like hit point for a finger, right? The pins should have, I mean, this is kind of a design consideration, but like something that kind of points at the location of the place. So by default, the map is it's like an XY coordinate plane, right? So if you say I want a pin at this XY, the top left corner of the pin is going to be at that location. What you really want is kind of the pin maybe to be above it and pointing down at it or something like that, right? Or below it and pointing up at it, or there's some decisions to be made there probably. The pins should show a scaled down, like object fit cover style thumbnail image. Does that make sense? So let's see. So this is how I guess I don't have a little caret, so I don't know why I'm specifying that, but the idea, like all of these thumbnails are all, a lot of them are different. Some are square, some are rectangles, but all of the icons are the same size. And we use object fit cover or something like that to make it so it sort of fills up the square. You know what I mean? So it's kind of cropped. Like in the case of this one, it's hard to see on the icon itself, but it's actually cropping the sides out to make the image square. It's not shrinking it down and leaving space at the top and bottom. Does that make sense?
So the icons are actually the images, in case if those images for those things exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you'll see like some of these have a sort of a default image because they don't have an image associated with them. And then other ones, it's just using the image that Wikipedia sends back. So when you have an image, use the image for the icon. When you don't have an image, you have a default of some kind, which I think is specified in there as well. Yeah, pins should render a default pin image when no thumbnail is returned. And let's see. So there are, another AC is there are locations where we're not getting any locations back from the API. So the app should handle that case without generating errors. So this, I mean, even just talking through these acceptance criteria after having done having the story splitting thing fresh in my mind, like there are probably several ways to split this story down into smaller stories if we want to. If we think we can get all this done in the amount of time that we still haven't agreed on, which we should probably do, then we could keep it as one story. But there are some fault lines here that we could follow if we want. So just to be really clear, at this point, we're not using the user's device location. That's a story down the line. So you don't need to, prompt the user to share the location, all that kind of stuff. And we're also not concerned right now about adding any interactivity to the pins. So, like on here, I can tap the pins and stuff, but we're gonna do that later as well. Given a user with the app open to the default view when the app loads, the current map center should be sent to the nearby API proxy endpoint to fetch locations and display them as pins on the map. So that's just another way of saying some of the things we said above. iOS and Android are our target platforms. QA should be just to launch the app and the pins should show up. So it should be a pretty simple flow for the QA. And you will probably want to try it out with a location that has been verified not to returning any results. So, if you did like, I'm just guessing that 0, 0 probably doesn't have any results, right? Oh, it does have results. No, what's there? I guess it's the northeasternmost part of tropical. What, really? Okay. Anyway, find a location that doesn't have any results. We can just we throw it out in the ocean like there's not going to be anything. So, and just make sure that it works there too. So, having gone through all of that, do we feel like we want to split this story? Should we agree on what our time frame is for our stories? Would that be helpful?
I think 3 days
I agree.
feels smart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this would be made into separate stories, but I'm still feeling kind of shaky as to really creating a different, exactly how to narrow it down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I think everything in the presentation made sense, but I'm still just kind of like, how long will this really take once you start diving in? So I'm feeling a little hesitant on suggesting where those lines would maybe be.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk that through. We're a little over time.
But also, can I ask a quick question? So if we split the story into sub-stories, does this mean that one of the teams will have to wait for the first team to finish working on a story, because like the result, they will be dependent on the result. No?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So what we might, let's see the other stories. So there's these two rendering ones, and then there's allow users to tap map pins for more information, and allow user to drag the map to a new location. So we actually could, I think we could work on this one while the other ones are happening. Like it's what that would do is like if you, so this one is really about, you can, take the map and drag it around and it just sets a new center. Okay, so that sounds to me like something that could happen at the same time the other team is just using whatever the value of center is to make an API call, right? Those could be two separate trains of work. And then when we integrate them, just make sure that, when the team that's doing the dragging around is setting the same variable that the other team is using. And then the two should just kind of integrate, right? So in this case, as a user, I want to drag the map to a new location so that I can view places for that location. So the assumption is we have a map that's rendering. Okay, so what I just said kind of violates the assumption. And this is why user stories are negotiable. We can actually decide to do this before we have that assumption satisfied. So it'd be easier to test if this were already done, but we can actually we can verify that the center is being set some other way. We maybe just display it, in the header or something, right? So this is really key. Like like the dragging around is actually one of the more fun things about the app. You can actually, say you're traveling somewhere, you just drag the map over to the place where you're going, and you start to explore and be like, oh, that looks cool. I want to go there. I want to see this thing, right? So it's really key to the app. I guess it doesn't necessarily depend on this other thing being complete if we're going to do it this way. This is where the events that get fired, I kind of asked y'all to kind of brush up on that, or like read up a little bit on the Google Maps events, because there are different ways to do this. So anyway, so that's a piece of this. Some of the risk in this one comes from, it's possible to stack up multiple calls to the API. If you drag and drag and drag, all of a sudden there's, depending on how you handle the events, you could be sending off a bunch of API calls, and then it's hard for the app to handle when those calls all return. Does that make sense? So this is a good time to build into the app some mechanism that ensures that we're only ever making one API call at a time. So there may be some way to, or there's a few different ways to, once we fire off an API call, basically block any new calls until that one's returned or timed out or something like that. You're very thoughtful, Katya.
And what triggers an API call? Is it the app loading? As the app gets loaded, the API call starts.
Yeah, so we load the app. The app makes its first API call to get the initial set of pins. And then as we drag around, we want to make subsequent calls to that same endpoint with the new Latin long. But because of the nature of the app, like it's possible, somebody, they drag a little bit, they drag more, like they could do that pretty in like quick succession. So you may be firing off a bunch of these requests to that proxy endpoint. And then it just gets confusing how to handle it. So a simple way to deal with that is just to only allow the app to make one call at a time.
I do like Lauren's idea that she put in the chat that you could use dummy data to make a list.
True. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think especially with the list page, because like rendering pins on a map is going to be a little bit trickier without the real data, because it's just going to give you the actual data will help you render the pins a little bit better, but rendering a table with pretend data wouldn't be as challenging. So like one team could be working on that process, understanding what the data that you're going to get back is, and then build just a pretend JSON blob of the data you're going to get back work on rendering the list or the table. And then when the API team is done, you're like, okay, now I got my actual API call. I can verify.
Yeah, I like that too.
A lot of the work.
Oh, and I would suggest just, you know, feeding this little URL some location of interest, and using, you know, to save this to a JSON file and load it in, or like save it to literally it's a blob of JSON in your component or something, and just use that as your data instead of trying to, like, you know, handwrite your own version of it or something. So yeah, that's a really good approach. So do we, again, I guess, do we want to split this? Do we want to see how it goes? Do we want to, like, to me, like the API call itself, like, you know, there's a bit of scope there. Like, you probably want to set that up in a way that's kind of isolated, and, you know, you just kind of import it into a component, because you don't need the list and the map both to make API calls. So you want probably that to happen in one place. It's abstracted away from those components themselves. And then the rendering seems like it's separate, a different kind of task. So maybe we do split that out. What do you think? I think we should. I think we should. Let's do that. Okay. All right. So what I will do today, but probably not in the next hour because I haven't eaten yet today, is to try to extract the API call part of this into its own story. So you can use this story to get started on that task. Oops, sorry, not this one, the other one, not the dragging one. Render this one. So, you know, use this information to get started on that. I'm just basically going to take this and copy it into a different story, reduce this one down to just rendering, and I'll reduce the list one down to just rendering. The list one doesn't have to be a table either. It could be a list of details elements that, you know, show the name of the place and the icon, and you hit the little disclosure thing and it shows more information or something. You know, you can get kind of creative about how you structure that. But should probably look at that one too, I guess. It does say table, but everything's negotiable, as we learned. So you'll see, like, the top of this one is the same as the other, like around getting the data and everything. So I'm going to extract that out. And then this one covers sort of the data points that we want to have present. So we want, you'll get back from the API, you'll get the distance, but it's not in kilometers. You have to convert it. I can't remember what I think it's in meters. So, like, you know, 8,000 meters or whatever. So, so you need to convert that. The thumbnail, if it's present again, the name, the description, and a link to view the place on Wikipedia. So you get a page ID back with the API as well. And so you can actually make it, like, you can make a link that links to this, basically, like current ID equals and whatever the page ID is to create those links. So yeah, so this is an example of how it could look, but like I said, you should, you know, think of what makes sense in terms of like the user experience. The nice thing about the table is you can order it by distance, so you could have the things that are closest to the person be at the top of the list. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? This is kind of the weird thing about this project is, like, the first week's like, oh, this is easy, no problem. And then the second week, you're like, oh, this is actually fairly complex. So
I have
yeah.
a question. Regarding the API, again, the first one, the API call, we are supposed to make the first API call as soon as the map gets loaded, or this is the bit that I don't understand. Oh,
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So so the map takes a minute to sort of initialize when you first come. here, right? So probably makes sense, yeah, to wait till the map is ready and then make the API call. Does that make sense? Is that what you're asking? So otherwise you'd have kind of a race condition. You know, there are other ways to handle this. Like that's actually kind of a performance concern, to be honest. So like if you could have it make the call as soon as the app launches while the map is getting ready. Hold on to that data until the map's ready and then render it. And that would probably feel faster to the user than wait for the map to be ready, then make the call, then render. Does that make sense? But that's also, it's simpler to do it the second way. Because the map will tell you like, okay, I'm ready now. And then you know you have a place to put, you know, to render the information. So just for scope concerns, maybe we would split in that way. Like we would, you know, if we feel like it really does take a long time for the thing to boot up later on in the project, we could come back and like, you know, do that other sequence that I talked about. Would be my recommendation. It's a good question though. All right. How are y'all feeling? I feel like this is a lot more ambiguous. Are you okay with that? Do you feel like you know enough to get started? Because I'm kind of conscious we're like way over time. So
I think so.
I see people nodding. Yeah. Okay. Well,
We
as
need
you dig
to
into it.
choose.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was
we need
just
to
gonna say we
assign
need
people
to
to the different
choose
ones.
who's gonna do what. Yeah.
Who wants to be the API team?
We can be. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who we are paired with.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can be down.
Megan.
All right,
Yeah.
Katya and Megan. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. And Alejandro and Jessica, that means that you will be the team that takes, you know, something like this, copies it into a variable in your component, and then, you know, render using that as your data. And then once they finish the API, you know, you'll review their work, and then once that's merged, then you'll hook your work up to the actual live API. Does that make sense?
I think it does. We'll
Okay,
ask
cool.
questions if we need it.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
definitely
sure.
ask questions. We'll make sure all this stuff is ready to be worked on, and yeah, we didn't talk about tapping map pins for more information, but maybe what we do is let's get through these couple of issues and see. I mean, it could easily take all week to get those things done, or all 5 hours, I guess. So.
Yep. And we could always have some kind of sync or async conversation about the tapping them pins.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Actually, kind of didn't mean to put the tap to select it, but all right. So what does our board look like now? Oh, it's more than we're supposed to have. I think it's more because we have the epic itself isn't counted. But I did kind of not mean to put the tapping into selected. So I'll move that one back out. All right, that's better. I love seeing this. Okay. All right, that was a lot of information. But y'all are doing great. You're doing a great job. And
Yeah.
I feel like you're gonna learn a lot through the process of this. So yeah, just hit us up with questions when they come up. Not if they come up, I'm sure they will come up. So
yeah,
don't hesitate. How you feeling, team?
As good as can be.
Yeah, this is fun.
Right.
This is fun. It's fun to get those like pins. It's fun to start getting back the data. It's fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Y'all, I have full confidence in you. You can do this. Just you know, anything that looks hard, try to break it down into a smaller problem and tackle that problem first. All right. Cool. All right.
Cool.
Thank you, everybody.
Great work, everyone.
Right.
Bye,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye.
Bye.